Hello, I'm Andy Shinosky. I've been a hand engraver for the past 30 years, and during that time I've looked for faster and more efficient ways to draw scrolls. I've always been intrigued by vector drawing programs because the vector format makes for a very clean, smooth line. I've tried all the other different vector programs such as Illustrator, CorelDRAW, Affinity, and every time I tried to use one for scroll design, I ended up frustrated, throwing my hands in the air and just giving up. About 5 years ago, I came across a tutorial video on YouTube explaining how to draw flourishes in Inkscape. It opened my eyes to what could be done using a tool called the Spiro tool. The presenter in the video was not a scroll designer, so he didn't really understand the best methods for using the tool. Since then, I've searched for other videos demonstrating how to use the tool effectively, but I haven't found many. While there are quite a number of good Inkscape tutorial sites that mention it, they tend to cast it aside after briefly showing how it works. Once I learned to use it properly, I discovered it completely replaced the need for the standard Bezier path tool. By the way, if you download the program, you may find that your screen looks different than mine. That's because I went into the program preferences and removed all the tools from the toolbar that I never use. This gives me a much cleaner interface to work from. If you decide to give it a try and you download the program, please get version 1.2.2. It's not the latest version, but it's a very stable version and will do everything you need. Some of the newer versions actually introduce a bug into the Spiro tool, so I don't recommend them. I'll put a link in the description below to the version I do recommend. Inkscape is available for Mac, PC, and Linux, and they all work the same. It is open source software and free, which is another reason to like it. I understand that a lot of people have never used a vector drawing program before, so I will try to gear this video towards a completely novice user. If you do have experience using a vector drawing program, please be patient. I also recommend that you watch the whole video from beginning to end before you try to use the software. By doing so, you will skip over a lot of frustration and confusion. I will include chapter breaks so that if after you've watched it through, if you still have questions, you can go back and see the parts of the video that you're confused about, and it will be easy to find them. Okay, so let's just dive right in. So what is the difference between all the other vector drawing programs and Inkscape in this regard? First, let's take a look at the standard Bezier pen tool and how it differs from the Spiro tool. This tool functions the way that the Bezier tool works in most every other vector drawing program on the market. To get to it, let's click on this icon here, which represents the pen tool. When you select any tool, you'll get some options for that tool at the top of the screen. And in this case, we see some options for the mode, the very first of which is the Bezier tool. So I will select this first option. Also pay attention to the area that says Shape to the right. Right next to it is a drop-down box, and we want to make sure that None is selected in that box. We will come back to the options in this box later, but for now we select None. The way this tool works is by placing points which are called nodes. These nodes and the handles that are pulled out control the shape of the line. The way you will use it is to click and drag at each node. How far you drag the handle out will determine the strength that node will have upon the overall curve. Once you've placed your last point, right-click with the mouse to terminate and finish the curve. Now we can go back to our toolbox menu, select the second option, which is Node Editing. Now we can click on our nodes and we can drag the handles around to try to get the shape that we want. So you can see that this is not a very good or efficient method for drawing a scroll. So let's go back to the pen tool on the left here. Let's reselect it, and this time we'll go up to the mode and we'll select the second option, which is Create Spiro Path. We have None selected for the shape. Let's just go and click points close to where we placed the original ones. When I'm finished, I'm going to click the right mouse button to terminate the line. I'm going to go up and choose the selection tool here, and I'm going to move this one to the right. So right away you can see that drawing with this tool is far superior to drawing with the original Bezier path tool. Now let me select the second option on the menu, the node editing. Click on the Spiro path. This is what really makes this tool shine, is the editing. You can easily edit these nodes, move them around, and the algorithm will constantly try to maintain a smooth curve. You can move these handles around, but they have no effect. We'll talk about those later on, why they are even there. But for now, you can see how easy this is. Before we proceed any further, I think it's important to take a step back and cover some of the conventions of this program so that you can understand the terminology and how to navigate. So, basically, if you want to zoom in and out on your screen, the easiest way to do it is to hold down the control key and roll your mouse wheel. That will zoom you in and out. To pan, you would hold down the spacebar and simply move your mouse around. Sometimes you may find it necessary to left-click in order to get this working. There are other navigation tools, but these are the simplest ways to get around. Next, let's talk about the interface a little. Inkscape is much like other programs such as Photoshop, where it's like a giant toolbox with all kinds of tools, all kinds of things you could do, but for the most part you may only need a screwdriver, so that's all you use. That's why I myself shut off some of the other tools in the interface, because I don't even need to see them. Some of the things across the top, well, they're pretty standard and you don't have any option about whether they're on the menu or not. Although I very rarely even use most of these things. Sometimes when I need to do specific things, I'll just use the menus at the top. But off to the right you have the Docker palette. You will find that you're going to spend a lot of time here. And in here you have multiple options. You have a fill and stroke menu. You have an alignment palette for aligning the edges and tops of the different elements. Then you have a layers palette. You're going to spend a lot of time here. You can make different layers visible and you can lock them. You can arrange your elements here. Click on an element here and it will highlight it on the page. Then I also have on my particular Docker palette the path effects. This is something that I use a lot, so I keep it on here. I won't go into that further. If you want to add other things to the Docker, there is a drop-down menu to the right. Click on it. It will provide you with a list of other palettes that you can bring to the Docker. If you're looking at your screen and you don't see this Docker at all, the only thing you need to do to activate it is to call up one of these palettes, and you can do that through this top menu like you have right here. You see the Edit Objects icon here. When you click on it, it will bring up your Docker. In fact, let me just shut it off so that you can't see it at all. I brought it all the way to the right. Well, in this mode we could actually bring it in, but I think there's a way to turn it off. I'm not sure. But in any case, if it's not visible, you can click on any of these icons at the top and it'll pop back onto the screen. Okay, so let's talk about a few other things. This very first icon is called the Selection tool. It allows you to select an element or a group of elements and then transform them by scaling or rotating or simply relocating them. If you hold down the Control key and drag one of the corners, it will scale proportionally. If you drag without holding down the Control key, it's free to change the proportions or ratios. If we click on the element a second time, we get different options, such as rotation and skewing. And you will also have this point that is the rotation center. And you can move that rotation center to wherever you want. So now if I click on one of these, oops, I didn't get that right. Yeah, I'm rotating around that point now. You can click and drag it around. But this tool works on the entire element. If you go back to the menu on the left and select the second option, this is the node editing. This tool allows you to change the shape of the curve. You can move, but you're working on the individual nodes. Within this tool, you can highlight more than one node at a time and then drag them all around. Let me just undo that. Also, if we want to edit this particular line, say we've drawn it and we realize, you know what, I need this line to extend a little further. So the way to do that and to add more nodes to it, you first need to highlight the element like I did with the node editing tool, which shows all the nodes, and then you go back to the pen tool. You'll notice that all the other nodes have disappeared and you only have the nodes on the ends. At this point you would just click on one of those and continue drawing, and it will allow you to add to it. You can do it on either end. Let's see what else we want to do here. Okay, I selected the node editing tool again, so now all the nodes are visible. Suppose we feel like, oh, I don't have enough control between this point and this point. How can I add another node in between? Well, it's actually very simple. You simply highlight the two nodes that you want to place a node between, then you come up to the top panel here on the toolbar at the top. There's a plus sign all the way on the very left. Click that and it will add a new node in between the other two existing nodes. Now, if you want to move it by itself, first you have to deselect the existing nodes. Then you just select the one you want and you can move it around. So that's how you add extra nodes. Okay, perhaps you find you have too many nodes. What happens when you have too many nodes is that editing becomes more difficult. So the number one rule in drawing using a vector program is to use the minimum number of nodes to achieve the shape you desire. You will get the smoothest shape when you will have an easier time editing. So say this is an extra node here. Now we want to get rid of it. All we have to do is click on it and then hit the delete key. Oftentimes what will happen is this. See how I suddenly have sharp corner nodes on either side? Even though it appears broken, this is easily fixed. Simply hold down the control key and click on the sharp nodes. They will convert back to smooth nodes and it'll smooth your curve back out. Sometimes you'll do something that breaks all of these nodes. The easiest way to fix them is to just select them all and go up to the very top here and choose this, the icon that designates a smooth node. Just click on that and it should straighten everything out. You'll actually know when a node has been changed. Like for instance, we'll delete this one out. Suddenly they went from square nodes to this one's a diamond shape and this one's a diamond shape. If you look at the top here, you will see these sharp points. Sharp corner nodes are diamonds and the smooth ones are squares. If we select this node and then go up and hit the second option here, which is smooth node, it will straighten the curve back out. Okay, one other thing. I've showed you how to make smooth curves. Well, what if you want a sharp corner? I'll actually demonstrate that. We'll start with another curve. We'll just draw it out here in space somewhere. So I'm coming along and I'm placing normal nodes and I want to put a sharp corner. So hold down the shift key and click. That will generate a sharp corner, and the same thing when you come back around. If you want to close the shape with a sharp corner, simply hold the shift key and click on it. And now it'll be a closed shape with sharp endpoints. Okay, so let's go back to our selection tool. Let's get rid of some of this stuff on the screen here. Rotate it around a little bit. Okay, let's talk about fill and stroke. What you're seeing right now on the screen is a shape with a stroke applied to it. Now you can change the width of that, or you could color in the center, which is just called a fill. If I wanted to fill this with pink per se, I would come down to the color menu here. I would then simply left click on any color and it will fill the shape with that color. Then if I want to change the stroke color or turn the stroke off altogether, you would hold the shift key as you click. And while holding the shift key, simply click on the X. And there, I turned off the stroke. If I want to turn it back on, I would hold the shift key and select on any color or black. Then to change the width of the stroke, there are a number of ways to do it. First, there is information in the status bar that informs you about what your fill and stroke are. Then right next to the stroke color indicator is a number. If I right click on it, it brings up a menu and I can choose the width of my stroke here. So let's switch to something like 4. So you see it grew quite a bit. Let's choose something like 10. Another way to change these is the fill and stroke menu over on the right. In this palette, you can change the fill properties, the stroke properties, and a number of other stroke styles and end caps and such. We're not going to cover these for now, so we'll just stop right there. A moment ago, I talked about closing this particular shape. I probably got ahead of myself. I should have explained the difference between an open shape and a closed shape. The one here on the right, this path is considered an open shape for obvious reasons. And now, even though it's an open shape, you could still put a fill on it. So if I select that, left click on a color, let's say any color, you'll see it will automatically connect the endpoints and fill in between. But generally, you don't use a fill on an open shape. Sometimes you will get an unexpected fill on an open shape. To fix it, you simply click on the X on the bottom menu to turn it off. So this is considered an open shape. This one on the left here is considered a closed shape for obvious reasons once again. Next, let me show you how to duplicate objects and elements in Inkscape. This is something you're going to do a lot, and there are a number of ways to do it. The first way is the conventional way, which is copy and paste. So if you did a Command C, you would copy something, and if you hit Command V, it would paste it. Where did it go? So let's see. Oops. Oh, that didn't work. Let's try that again. Let's Control C and Control V. There we go. But what you'll notice is that it pops it down there off to the side. It's not aligned with the original. Let me just delete that one. The method that I prefer is Command D, which will duplicate. So if you select your object and hit Command D, it may look like nothing happened, but you actually have a second copy right on top of the original. Let me undo that. So the reason this is nice is because often when I duplicate things, I will flip them or I'll mirror them. So in order to mirror this particular item, all you have to hit is the H or the V key. If you want to flip it horizontally, you will push the H key, and now it's flipped over there. If you move it around at this point, you can hold down the Control key and it will move relative to the X or the Y axis. Let's go ahead and delete that. If we select it and hit the V key, it flips in the other direction. That flipped the original because there wasn't a duplicate there. If I hit Command C, that will undo that. Okay, the one thing I haven't discussed yet is the best practices for drawing a scroll as far as node placement. Where would we put them? I already discussed the fact that the fewest number of points is always the best. It's going to give you the smoothest curve and it's going to be the easiest to edit. When you're drawing an object like a scroll that is fairly round, you want to place your nodes at the compass points like north, east, south, and west. So as you're working your way around, and I'll demonstrate this here, we'll start a new scroll here. We'll start out at north. Let me make sure we're on the, yes, okay. North, west, south, east, north, west, south, east, north, west. You don't have to be super critical about this because we're going to go back and edit it. East, north, west, and we'll go maybe one more. Let's go south. Oops, let me turn down the stroke a little bit. We'll turn that down to say 2. All right, now let's go back into our editing tool. You can see some of these nodes aren't where we want them to be, but here's where you have a chance to edit. Editing is super easy. You just come in and start dragging these points around. Sometimes you're going to want to drag more than one at a time. You could just put a box around them and then move that. Pull this down a bit. Let me zoom in a little bit. Hold down the Control key and roll the mouse wheel. Let's take this one back up a little higher. I don't want this one here. So now I can just move things together en masse. Now, having said that, the most useful place to put these is at the compass points. There is a situation where that doesn't work the best, and that is when you have a very tight turn going into a very broad turn. I generally move one of these points to where it's about like this. It gives you less of a gap in here. If you have it all the way to the bottom, you end up with a bigger gap and it makes it harder to fill with a leaf or some other element. Let's take these ones up at the top and pull them out a little bit too. Let's grow the center section also. This is really as hard as it gets right here, and it's still super easy. Once you've been doing this for a little while, it just becomes second nature where to put the points. There are places where you need to deviate from the compass points, but we'll get into those as we're doing some more drawing down the line. So let me just go ahead and delete this. Oops, I hit the wrong button there. Let's hit delete. Okay, let me show you one of the most common uses for drawing vectors in conjunction with scroll work. Let me turn on layer number 2 here. I took the liberty of putting this image on a layer earlier. It's not to any particular scale or anything, it's just something to work from. My vectors are going to be on a new layer and we're going to go in and trace this design, and I'll show you how easy it is to do. Let's switch to our pen tool. We're on Spiro, shape is on none. It is as simple as going in back to the compass points like I talked about before. Sometimes, like this is the farthest point left, and it looks like it's going to create a bigger arc than I want, but go ahead and choose that point anyhow. Then when you swing up to the top, it's as you start coming around, it readjusts the whole curve. Very easy. And this is, if I haven't said it before, this is fast. I can trace this entire image in no time. Now, I think I showed you this before. But sometimes this node needs to come back around closer to the origin in order to get the shape that I want there. This is a good way to test your existing drawings to see if they're actually smooth and drawn accurately. Okay, and we can continue drawing some more. Choose the tool again. Here's a situation where you need extra points. When you have a sweeping curve coming into a tight curve, you will need to treat the tighter curve like its own little curve, which requires generally 3 points. 1, 2, 3. Let me go back to the node editing tool. These 3 are close together, and the broad sweeping one, this one, can even move itself way back, and it'll help to make the curve a little smoother. You have to play around with it. Once you do this for a little while, it becomes second nature. Let's go ahead and select the tool again. I actually have the stroke pretty high right now. Let me select all these and shrink the stroke down. Make it, let's just say 1. Let's continue with the pen tool. Here's where I need a sharp corner. So I'm going to hold the Shift key. I'm going to click. I need 3 points to define the inside of the S shape. I held down the Shift key on that last point so that I could have a sharp corner. And I'll hit the Shift key again for another sharp corner. And hit the right mouse button to end. So this goes very quickly. And it's very easy to edit. Let's go do this one down here. Shift key. Enter. Start a new one. Shift key to sharp corner. Shift key. And right mouse button to end it. So you can work your way around this design really quick. Now where this is useful is when I have a drawing that I've hand drawn, say Procreate or even a scanned physical drawing. When I need to transfer this to say still, like the bolster of a knife, to engrave, I prefer a very thin line. So in the past, before I had the ability to use Procreate or even a vector drawing program, I would literally scale my drawings way up big and then trace them using tracing paper and a fine line pen. Then I would scan that drawing back in and shrink it back down, so when transferring it to the still I had a very fine line to follow. I just prefer engraving against a fine line. Most of my designs are fairly small and intricate. Having a thick line, I end up getting bends and kinks in my scrolls because it's difficult to follow the line accurately. Okay, so what is another technique I use this for? I can create backbone layouts very easily and very quickly using this method. I've already taken the liberty of placing an image on another layer of the shape of a bolster for a dagger that I made this last year. So I'm going to drag a guideline out from the ruler on the side. You can drag out guides, and if you highlight one, you can then delete it. Let me see. Delete that. Okay. Now I'm going to switch to my pen tool with the Spiro path mode, and I'm going to start drawing in a scroll here. Hit the right mouse button to terminate. Let me shrink down the size of the stroke to make it 0.5. It's a little too thick. I can go in here and edit this to get it to the shape that I want. Let me add to the line there by extending it. Terminate that. Okay, let me just tweak it a little bit here. Let's bring this up to the top. Bring this around a little bit. Get everything, oops, how'd that happen? All right, now I'm going to go back to my selection tool. I'm just going to move this around, maybe rotate it a little bit to fit the space better. Okay, there we go. Now let's scale it out just a little bit more so it hits my center line. Okay, so now I have one scroll out of my layout. At this point, I'm going to duplicate this element by hitting the Command or the Control key, depending on whether you're on a Mac or a PC. I'm going to hit the D key, which duplicated that. Next, I'm going to drag it down, the duplicate. I'm going to rotate it a little bit here. Click it a second time to get my rotation handles. I'm going to drag it up. I'm going to have to scale it just a little bit. No, on second thought, I don't want to scale it. There is something I wanted to show you. The reason I did it the way I have is because I wanted to maintain a consistent shape of the scroll and the size of the head of the scroll. Let me just spin this around until it fits between my guideline and the border. Right there is pretty good. Now try going back just a little bit. There we go. Then I'm going to switch to the node editing tool. I'm going to select all these nodes right here and I'm going to delete them. Got too many there. Don't know how that happened. Let's undo that. Let's just take these ones right here, delete them. I'm going to take this node up here and I'm going to bring it around. Okay, now I've got my second scroll. Let's go back to the selection tool, hit Command D to duplicate again, and then I'm going to hit the H key to flip it. And I'm going to drag it down. Let's just go up a little bit. Let's rotate it around a little bit. All right, that's good. Then I'm going to switch back to my node editing tool, drag this one around. Okay, back to my selection tool, Command D, and then I'll flip it again with the H key and drag that down. Maybe scale this just a little bit. The problem here is that now we're going from a smaller scroll to a bigger scroll, which is not a great design choice. But for now, I'll just leave it the way it is, just so you can get the idea of how this works. And so now I've got 4 pretty good scrolls here. I'm going to select them all. Then I'll hold the Command or the Control key and select G, which will group them, keep them all as one unit. Then I'm going to hold Command D to duplicate, the H key to flip it, then while holding the Control key, I'll drag it to the right. So now in just moments, I've created a pretty good scroll design. I've taken the liberty of drawing a few others here. I mean, you could make them looser. This one has only 3 skulls on a side, whereas this one has 4 on a side. At this point, I could take these elements, I can export them as a pixel image and bring it back into Procreate or some other drawing program, or print it out, and then continue fleshing out the design with leaves or whatever other elements I want to put into it. Okay, I showed you how to group things. I guess I should have shown you how to ungroup things as well. Command G was the command to group the elements together. If you need to ungroup them, you would hold Shift Command G and that will break them up. You can see the bounding boxes now around each of the separate elements. Okay, now that I've shown you how to draw these single line scrolls, where maybe you're tracing an existing design, where you're creating new backbone scrolls, these are good for references. Say you create these backbones and you bring it into Procreate, put it on its own layer, and then you can trace over it. It's fine for that, and it's also fine for maybe transferring a fine line tracing to your project that you're perhaps going to engrave on. It's good for those things, but it's not good for, say, V-carving on a CNC router, or if you're running a laser engraving machine where you need some thickness to the lines. I say that because programs like Lightburn that actually do this type of laser engraving do not respect the stroke width. So you need to create filled shapes for that. And I'll quickly show you how to do that next. So let me turn this layer off, and okay, there it is up there. Let's get rid of this down here too. If you have an element and you don't know what layer it's on, you can select it, look in the status bar at the bottom. It will show you the layer that element exists on. So I'm going to turn that off there. Okay, let's see. Where's that there? I'm going to turn that off too. Okay, so I have an actual design that I placed on a layer. That is something else I didn't show you earlier, and I guess I should do that now. Looking at your layers palette, if you need a new layer, it's as simple as clicking on the little plus sign at the very top of the layers palette. That will add a new layer and give you the opportunity to give it a name. This icon next to it switches the view to a layers view only. It won't show you all the individual elements, it only shows you the layer. Generally, I leave it turned on so I can see all my elements. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer above this one. I'm going to call it illustration. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use the same tool we've been using, but we're going to create filled shapes. So let me choose my pen tool. We're on Shape None. We're on Spiro Path. So we'll just work on maybe this leaf on the bottom. I'm going to come around, and I'm going to hold the Shift key, then I'm going to start working my way back around. I'll try to match the points that I placed initially. Let's switch to the node editing tool. Here you can see that I like to keep the nodes in pairs, although here I didn't accomplish that. For now it doesn't really matter. It looks pretty good the way it is, but you generally want to keep your nodes together in pairs. It gives you the smoothest rate of change along the shape. Now I want to fill this. I'm going to turn the stroke off. So to turn the stroke off, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and click on the X. Then I will click on the black swatch. I will use the left mouse key button and turn on the fill. Okay, click off. Now there's one element. Now we just move on to the next one. We're just going to build these things up one at a time. I'm going to click here, work my way around. I'm going to hit the Shift key to get a sharp corner, work my way back around. Then when I get here, I'm going to hold the Shift key again to get a sharp corner and then go back to my original one. And so now it fills that in. Click here. I'm going to keep working my way around. Hold the Shift key to get a sharp point. You need at least 3 points on a curve. I'm going to put 3 points here, then I'm going to put another 3 points here. I'm going to hold the Shift key, move over, start working my way back around. The advantage to doing this also is you can vary your line thickness here. When you have engraved lines that are all the same width, the design just doesn't have any life. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key here to get a sharp corner. Shift key. Sometimes when you drag out, you can see whether you need an extra point or not, or if it's going to make the shape you want. I'm going to hold the Shift key, select the next one. Okay, this is all it takes to trace your design. And if you were to send this to a laser machine, it would burn these shapes just as you see it here. Now, this is good. Let me just do a little bit more here. Let's work our way around the head of this scroll here. I'm just going to stop there. Normally we would go all the way around. Okay, let's fix that a little bit. It's a little wonky. It's because these nodes aren't matching up, and because I also need another one in here. Let's select this one, and then press the plus icon, and it will give us another point. Let's line these up together. Let's pair them up. Pair these up. Pair these up on the bottom. This is not real critical at this point. We'll just go there, and that's all we're going to do with that for now. So this is what you would do. You would follow the entire design around, doing it just the way I showed you. I do have one other technique for doing the shade lines. It saves a lot of time. Let me just show you how to do that here. What we're going to do is we're going to create a small circle here. I'm going to hold the Control key to give me a perfectly round circle. Although for what I'm doing, it really doesn't matter that much. Now I'm going to hit the left mouse button on the black. I'm going to fill that in, hold the Shift key and select the X, which turns the stroke off. Now I think I told you earlier about objects. Well, this circle is considered an object at this point because there's only 3 points on this object. If I go up to the Path menu and select Object to Path, you see I have 4 points here. I'm going to select this point on the right here, and I'm going to hit the Delete key. Then I'm going to take these handles, I'm going to swing them around. I basically want a half a circle. Then I'm going to choose the Select tool, and I'm going to hit Command C to copy this to my clipboard. Now I think I told you earlier about this. Let's go back to our pen tool. We have the modes, we're on Spiro, but if we go over to the shape, this is where we're going to use one of these other items in here. I generally don't use any of these. I always create my own shape and use from the clipboard. Now let me show you what this does. When I draw a line with the Spiro tool, it uses the shape and stretches it along the line. Then if you select the Node Editing tool, you can go back to the origin. Let me just zoom in a bit. You can drag this node and it could change the width of the shape. It's probably still too wide for my shade line, but let me show you how this works. Let me zoom down in here on this leaf. We're going to use the same tool. We're just going to click a few points. I'm going to land that right in the middle of that line. Press the right mouse button to terminate it. Now I've got a really nice shade line, maybe a little wider than I want. So I'm going to select the Node Editing tool, and I'm going to drag this node in to shrink it up a little bit. Now, because of the way I have my preferences set up, it'll duplicate the same line width on each successive line that I create. So I'm going to select the same tool again, and you can quickly, okay, you see what I just did there? It looks like a sharp point. Hit the Escape key and start over. For some reason, it loses its mind. All right, so you get the idea. This is how you create shade lines, and it goes really, really fast. Oops, there I have actually 3 points there. So I'm going to hit the Control Z to back out, hit the Control Z again. Sometimes when you place a point, you may accidentally double click it and it will create 2 points. These, like all the other elements, are very easy to edit. Just go back up and select your nodes and you can make it perfect. Okay, now I want to show you something. If we just highlight all these elements or select them all and turn the fill off, then turn the stroke on by holding Shift, you're going to see that what we have is a number of elements that overlap. This might be fine for some types of machines like perhaps a CNC router, but if you're on a laser machine, it's not going to like this because it's going to be burning the overlapping area twice and causing it to be deeper. This may not look so great. So at some point, usually at the end, when my design is totally drawn and I'm happy with it, I'll create a duplicate copy of the whole design, which will preserve the original, and then I'll select the duplicate. Then if you go up to the Path menu and select Union, but first let me zoom in so you can see what's happening here. Watch what happens here when I select Path Union. It combines all the elements into one. This is all one element now. But I don't generally do this until the end because once you do, you aren't going to be editing it. It would be very difficult to edit something that looks like this. Once it's converted, that is, you union these, it turns them all into one huge standard Bezier curve and strips the Spiro path information out of it. And it adds a huge number of points. So this is almost impossible to edit. It is possible, but you won't want to do it this way. That's why I always save the union until the very end. So let me just go back and turn my fill back on. And let me select my element. I think now would be a good time to discuss what it is about the Spiro path that makes it different and why it's important to understand it. I'm going to select the pen tool, select the Spiro path option. I'm going to put a few points on the screen. Okay, there we have a Spiro path. Earlier I mentioned a Docker palette called the Path Effects. I mentioned that I use it frequently. If we go over to the right here and take a look, the second option on my Docker is called Path Effects. I'm going to select it, And you'll notice that while I have my path active, the Path Effects palette shows an entry called Spiro Spline. The reason is because the Spiro path or Spiro spline is actually a path effect that is placed upon a standard Bezier curve. If I was to come over here and click on the eye icon, I could turn the effect off. And if you watch what happens to my line, you see it's basically a standard Bezier curve at this point. I can turn this off and on using the Path Effects Docker palette. Now, understanding how this works, there are times when combining multiple elements or cutting an element, the software will first convert the Spiro spline back to a standard Bezier curve. Because this effect is added on top of the standard Bezier curve, it turns it into something called an object. If we go up to the very top menu and select Path, you'll see the first option is called Object to Path. If I click on that, it converts my Spiro path into a standard path. It adds extra nodes in there to maintain the exact shape of the curve. It does a conversion process. It's not the same as just turning the Spiro path effect on and off. In fact, if you look over to the right in the Docker palette, you'll see that under Path Effects, there's nothing listed there. Now this is fine when you have reached a point in your design where you don't feel like you need to edit this path anymore. But should you need to edit again, it's going to be much more difficult now that it's a standard curve. But that's not the end of the world. In fact, at this point, if we went back to the Path Effects and click on the little plus sign at the bottom, we can add the Spiro Path Effect back on. When I click on that, it opens the Live Path Effects, which shows you all the different effects that you can use. We're only concerned with the Spiro spline, but right now we're only concerned with the Spiro spline. It's one of the few that I actually use. So all you have to do is click on this and you can see that it shows that it's back. Although, even though it looks the same as the original Spiro path, it does have a lot more nodes, which makes it a little harder to edit. But at this point, if you had to, you could always delete out some of these extra nodes and then repair it. In fact, I'll just demonstrate that. Basically took out every other node. It looks like it's broken, but if we hold down the control key and click on these diamond shaped nodes, it turns them back to smooth nodes and we're back to a curve that's easy to edit. Okay, now let me talk about another useful technique. Suppose you have two elements and one crosses over the other. Obviously you don't want the lines that are underneath to be showing, so how do we cut them out when you have two closed shapes? You can also do this with open shapes. Well, the way this works is, if you go to the path menu at the top, there are some different Boolean operations you can do. Now, the layer order is very important when you're doing one of these operations. In order to cut one with the other, you would select them both, and the one that is on top will become the tool that will cut away from the one on the bottom. So now that I've selected both, I'll go up to Path and select Difference. And the one that was on the top cut away from the one on the bottom. So let me go ahead and undo that. Suppose you want to keep both elements, but you just want one to cut the other. Well, the way to handle that is to select the one that you want to be the tool and hit Control or Command D to duplicate it. Then select your other one, the one that you want to cut away from, and we'll do the same thing. We'll go to Difference. This time, it cut the bottom away, but it left a copy of the original. And this is a good example of how you can inadvertently lose your Spiro path by doing some sort of an operation on it. If we switch back to the node editing tool, you will see that the one that was cut away from has extra points. This can be fixed, but at this point in your design, you probably won't need to edit it. So you could probably just leave it the way it is. Because these were closed shapes, the Path Difference tool would be the one that you would use to cut the bottom one. But let me set up a different situation. Let's just create two lines that cross each other. How would you cut one line with the second line? Well, first we would take the one that we want to be the tool, select it, and hit Command D to duplicate it. Then we would select the one that we want to split on the bottom. Okay, let me try that again. The one on the bottom, we would go up to Path, Cut Path, and now you can see we still have our original cutting tool, and the one on the bottom has been split into two separate pieces. Then you can delete what you don't need or do further operations. Okay, so what do we have here? This is a template file that I created. What it is a collection of leaf variations that have all been drawn in a Spiro path format, so they're easily editable. What I did was to create a group out of the different elements so that if you select on a leaf design, you get the whole thing at one time. What this is used for is creating a brand new design from scratch, allowing you to just drag and drop the different elements into your design and then to go into node editing mode to tweak them until they fit. It's a very fast way to generate some simple styles of scroll work. This may not be the best choice for some styles of work, but it works pretty well for this style. So I'll demonstrate. First, I'll select one of these C scroll types that already has some of the detail put into it. I'll select it, I'll hit Control D or Command D on the Mac to duplicate it, and I'll drag it onto the page. I'll zoom in on it, and I'm going to flip it and rotate it. And we'll rotate it a little bit more so that the bottoms of the C scroll are lined up. Then I'm going to press Control D or Command D on the Mac to duplicate it. And then I will flip it vertically, and I will also scale it down slightly. And then I will rotate it around a little bit. I'm going to drag out a guideline from the top so I can align the bottoms of these. Okay, I'll go into my node editing, select these nodes up here, delete them. Looks like we need an extra node in here, so I will select, let me turn this off. Get that adjusted. Okay, so now we have a couple of scrolls. I'm not going to build a big design, just enough to give you an idea of how this works. Then I have to fill this in with some leaves. So I just go over to my arsenal here and find an appropriate leaf design. First, let's hit the select tool to get into selection mode. And then I will grab, I don't know, we'll just take this one right here. We'll Command D to duplicate it. And we'll drag it back over into our design. Bring it up into location. Oops, let me zoom out a little bit. Click a second time to get the rotation handles. And then I'm going to scale it down a bit. Let me rotate it a little bit more. That looks about right. And I can go into the node editing tool and adjust some of these nodes. Just delete this one here. Okay, let's find another scroll, or another leaf I should say. Go back to the selection mode. Let's see, which one do we want? Let's go with this one right here. Command D. Scale it down a little bit. Well, let's maybe scale it back up a little bit now. Rotate it a little bit. Okay, let's go back into node editing. All right, now we have two leaves. I will probably fast forward through the video so you don't have to watch this thing in slow motion. Let's see, let's go to selection. Let's just grab this one. Command D to duplicate it. Come on. In order to pan, I press the spacebar and just move the mouse. Scale this one up a little bit. Okay, let's go back into node editing. Let's delete this one. We can also just go up and edit some of this here to fill in the space a little better. We're not limited to just scaling and rotating. Okay, let's find another one. Let's go with, well, let's try this one. Command D, drag it over, scale it down. I'm going to flip it horizontal. Click a second time to get the rotation handles. Yeah, let's rotate it a little bit more. That's good. Go into node editing. I like to add a lot of length to my leaves. Makes the design flow better. It's easy to do with the Spiro path. Alright, let's find another leaf to fill that spot. Let's go with let's flip it horizontal and rotate it and click it again to get the scale. Okay, I'm going to rotate that some more yet. Let's rotate a little bit more. Go into node editing. Actually, let's ungroup this by holding Shift, Command, and G. I've got to get rid of this shade line. We don't need that in there for now. Let's go back to node editing. Let's drag this way over here. Let's reshape this a bit. Let's adjust some of these in here. Let's adjust that. Okay, I don't like the looks of this. I still don't like that. Let's grab some of these and pull them back a bit. Okay, now I'm just going to select this scroll, hit Command D. I'm going to flip it vertically, drag it over. Let's scale it down a little bit. Let's rotate that a bit too. And go to node editing. Okay, so that's enough for now. You get the idea. I could show you a finished one here in a moment, but first, let me explain a little bit about this template file that I created. This is something you can do for yourself. It's just a collection of elements, but once you have your collection, it's best to save it as a template file. So the way to do that is to go up to the File menu, go to Save Template. It will bring up a dialog box where you have an opportunity to name it. We'll just call this Arsenal 2 since I already have one saved. You can put a description and some other words in here, but I don't bother. Hit save and it will be saved as a template file. Okay, then when you want to create a new file and use your template file, you would just go to File, New from Template, and you'll get a list. And in there is the file that I just saved. You just select it and then hit Create from Template, and it will open up a whole new file with the elements already there. Let me just go ahead and close this window. Okay. Now you can create one of these template files from your own work, or you can get a copy of mine if you're interested. I will have it available on my Buy Me a Coffee webpage. There will be a link in the description of the video. For a small price, you can have access to this exact file that you can use freely in all your work. There are even some finished designs in here as well that can be used royalty-free. So for now, I will end the video here as it's grown quite large. If you made it through this whole video, I congratulate you. I have some advanced techniques that I may get into, but they will have to wait for another video. Inkscape is an incredibly deep and powerful program, and I've only scratched the surface. If you want to go deeper, I recommend a YouTube channel called Logos by Nick. He's an extremely talented teacher and covers a lot of material.